Welcome to another CEO Wisdom Pod. We've got a serial entrepreneur and serious entrepreneur with us. His name is Alexander Harmsen. He is CEO and founder at Global Predictions, founded a bunch of very cool companies in the past, and is on a timeline today. So let's get this rolling. We've got 20 minutes to make greatness happen here. So Pod is brought to you by podfire.com. If you want to start, scale, be invited to podcast. And Alex, I'd love to learn a bit more about you and about Global Prediction.
Well, Charles, thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be here. Global Predictions, we started about 3 years ago. And oftentimes when we talk about Global Predictions, we really talk about our flagship consumer product, Portfolio Pilot. Basically, we have built the world's first SEC-regulated AI financial advisor. And so what that really means, we're going directly after human financial advisors with one major caveat. It's available for you 24/7 and truly personalized. We take in a number of different stats about your goals and current situation and taxes and fees that you might be paying, medium-term goals, long-term goals. We connect your specific portfolio, real estate, assets to our economic models, and then give you very, very specific advice, buy, sell recommendations, things that you might like to invest in, things you might want to diversify out of. How do we increase your downside protection? How do we increase your overall risk-adjusted returns? And we do that at for what we think is a very reasonable price, $29 a month. No other gotchas or caveats, no percentage AUM or anything like that. And maybe the extra special thing here is that we don't manage your money for you. And so we are truly just giving advice to you, and you retain control of everything you have. We one of our internal goals is to try to onboard people as early as as quickly as possible. And so what we feel comfortable saying right now is within the first 10 minutes of landing on portfoliopilot.com, we would be able to give you personalized advice. Really, the idea being, we can pull in, get you to answer a few questions, connect a few accounts, real estate, assets, and then run through tens of thousands of potential scenarios to give you, truly personalized recommendations for you that can help you improve your portfolio. And
That's
there's
quite
lots
cool.
and lots and lots that goes into that. My co-founder worked at Bridgewater for a long time. I've, like Charles said, I've run a number of previous startups. A lot of it's been focused on, hybrid AI, really trying to take, modern cutting-edge AI systems and build them into actual useful products rather than, keeping them in the R&D land where they, get papers written about them but never actually get used.
Dude, you have such an interesting background. It's almost like hard to keep track of it, but let's start with your exchange student trip in India. How did that change your life?
This was, I think, third year university. I attended one of the top schools in the entire world, in terms of it being the hardest and most sought after, IIT Delhi, the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi. And honestly, the route that I went through as an exchange student was probably the easiest way to get in. Right? Most of all of my other classmates, had to beat out 500,000 other Indian students writing this joint entrance exam. Pretty much every single one of my classmates basically had to drop out of high school in their last, year or two to specifically just study for this entrance exam. And it gave me a significant amount of appreciation for how other people in the world live. It expanded horizons. I like to think that I traveled quite a bit before then, but India was a different world. There was so much culture in the subcontinent, so many different languages, so many different religions. I basically worked my ass off, Monday to Friday just to keep up with my classmates. And then weekends, I traveled as much as I possibly could and, just tried to absorb as much as possible. One of the interesting things I read, I feel like there was something about going to India that made me think about sort of spirituality and who am I actually, what is happiness? And, I think even like wrote 50 or 60 pages of a book that I never published and still sits there, but sort of like I wanted to get thoughts down on paper, and basically thought about like, what is the purpose of life, not just for me, but for all of humanity. And I feel like for a long time, the purpose has been religious in nature, but basically the path that I think humanity should go down is to focus on sort of a joint purpose of just gathering as much knowledge as possible. And like, I think about this concept of sort of like, there's my world and the way I perceive everything, what I've learned, and there's your world. And they're both different versions of, the world, that what actually exists, what's true, what, what's actually there. And like our whole life purpose should be to discover what is the world. And I think it will bring all of us closer together. It's like a human wide goal that we could rally around. It's not just PhDs, but there's something about, increasing efficiency on the path to get there. There's education, there's lifting people out of poverty, there's like really pushing the boundary on technology. All of that benefits sort of like this one vision. And so India was many things. And then potentially crucially, like in India, at a certain point, I went on this one train trip and I met a guy there who years later eventually introduced me to my now wife. And so, if anything, that completely changed the course of my life.
Power of serendipity right there. I want to hear about your experience with the Canadian Forces as well. You are defense research and also squadron commander, which is quite interesting, and also NASA. And then we will talk about IRIS.
Yeah, you want to cover everything. I love this. I love the rapid fire questions. I got my pilot license really early on as part of this program in Canada. I was like pretty sold at a certain point on becoming an astronaut. I got my scuba diving license. I went through and got a STEM degree. I studied engineering physics with a minor in economics, really got into modeling and AI. And then at a certain point realized that it was more fun to build I built experiments for the International Space Station working at Airbus in Europe. I worked at Defense Research and Development Canada in Quebec City on, honestly, it was a top secret project at that point around propulsion systems. And that's probably all I can say about that. Even now, 10, 15 years later, potentially influence like a large $400 million government program. Really, I mean, I landed into that honestly by like, I probably contacted about 150 different people in my freshman year, and I wanted the coolest internship ever, even though I had no experience, and sort of networked my way, hustled my way into this really interesting experience with DRDC, Defense Research and Development Canada. I think NASA was pretty similar. Always wanted to work at NASA. I ended up working at the Jet Propulsion Lab on the Mars helicopter project. And basically, a Mars helicopter is like a little drone that popped out of a rover, a year or two ago on the Martian surface. That was a 10-year long project. I worked on that in, I think, 2014, sort of early phases of the program. And I learned from some incredible people, learned sort of machine learning, AI in its earliest days before deep learning, very focused on computer vision algorithms for navigation, localization, like against the Martian surface. The hardest thing about like flying a drone on Mars, I think people assume, is the atmosphere. But I mean, gravity helps a tremendous amount. The fact there's a lot less gravity, you have to spin a lot faster, because of the lower atmosphere. But the hardest thing is actually the lack of GPS. And so how do you locate yourself on the Martian surface? How do you navigate? And so, basically the only way to do that is by referencing the ground using cameras. And so with reference to the ground, you can locate yourself, localize yourself, and fly at the same time. So we're building a lot of those early computer vision algorithms, sort of proof of concept. Super cool. But the main problem, I think, was that there was a lot of older people with families at NASA, or like really young grads. And there was a huge depth of knowledge, and there was really cool lectures, and everyone around me was interesting. And the problem is that it felt like all projects were done over the course of 5 to 10 years. And I wanted to make progress. I want to work 14-hour days, really make something happen, today, next week, launch something next month. And so I took a lot of the lessons learned from, previous companies I worked at, some of the learnings from computer vision, AI, and applied that to Iris Automation, which is my first startup. We basically built the first, government approved autonomous vehicle system, that we could use that we could use and sell for commercial purposes. And honestly, that changed everything for me personally. And I like to think, and so maybe the key distinguishing feature, we're not talking about self-driving cars. We're talking about flying autonomous vehicles, drones, air taxis, being able to see the world the way that pilots see the world, being able to track and avoid other aircraft in national airspace. Not really for military applications, not really for consumer applications. It was for commercial applications, really focused on agricultural surveys and mining exploration and package delivery and transportation and railroad inspection, forest management, police work. And that ended up being quite successful over the course of the last, 6-7 years. We raised venture capital, built a team, expanded internationally, got regulatory approvals, helped the FAA actually, write rules and regulations, contributed a significant amount of research. We hired a pilot and bought a plane at one point to actually just, fly our drone at real aircraft to prove that we could avoid aircraft, in real time. A lot of fun there, a lot of lessons learned, a lot of mistakes made. And, I like to think that all of that leads me to where we are today with Global Predictions.
And when's that future that I'm going to be able to order pretty much anything at any time from a drone and it's going to be dropped at my house? When is that future going to be? Because it seems so inefficient to use cars to deliver things to my house. Why not just drop it on my roof and have this governed API that is going to avoid crashes? Every drone should be synced by that. And if not, they should not be in the air and or taken down by police drones. It sounds easy on paper, but pretty hard problem to solve, right? So when is that day going to come?
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it, right? You need to build really reliable aircraft. You need to do the collision avoidance. You need potentially parachutes. If they fall, then they fall at a lower pace. You need to think about navigation and deconfliction in the airspace, route management. You need to think about navigation, radios, and to do that at a scale of millions, is absolutely a challenge. But I think it's more regulatory challenge than anything else. And so the idea of, we spent 100 years building an extremely, extremely reliable aviation system where, at least in the US, there's something like 5 commercial crashes a year. And so if you were to introduce millions of new drones, inevitably you're going to have more than 5 crashes per year. Even if it's 99.99% safe, that's still an additional 100 crashes a year. And so I think that's really what it comes down to. And so there's this tension between, do we want to build drones and these networks to 99.69s of reliability, like current, commercial aviation, or do we somehow lower the threshold and increase the risk for the economic benefits? Honestly, the real answer is it's already happening in massive scale in the world right now. There's hundreds of thousands of commercial drones doing package delivery every single day. And, probably 99% of those commercial drones are in China. And so there's real taxi services in the world right now in China. There are real package delivery. There is scaled, transportation services. I think it's very likely that we'll see scaled package delivery services in places like Dubai, UAE, Brazil, Mexico, maybe. Even in the US, there's a number of pilot programs. Walmart's actually leaning into this very heavily. They're probably doing thousands, maybe tens of thousands of real package delivery flights a month at this point. Google Wing is very involved in this. Amazon is very, very involved in this. UPS, DHL does regular flights. Even in Japan, there's a fair amount of like existing package delivery networks set up to these like remote islands. So sort of places that are a little bit more remote, but are like inaccessible at the moment. And so obviously, like, we're thinking about sort of the Jetsons future of like in my backyard, but it's very likely we'll start at remote places and get to millions of flights a day before you might ever actually see it in a major city.
If I'd start my country on an island, I think it's one of the first thing I'd do. I think it's mostly legal BS. It's not that much of rocket science, especially if you build the community yourself and choose like who's gonna operate what. Anyway, more on that later. I want to ask though, you're shifting from quite literal rocket science and really complex stuff into investing. I mean, lots of competition there, and the market is moving constantly. It is a complex problem to solve, but doesn't it feel boring compared to building stuff that flies?
I mean, I think about it as very similar problems. If I really think about like the things that I really like doing, what's interesting to me are these like grand unsolved problems where we can use this hybrid AI technique. Maybe it's a little bit regulated, and so there's like red tape to cut through, and it's harder for the average person to enter a space like that. So there's natural barriers to entry. There's something about like modeling and simulation that I love, and being able to construct models of how the world works. And whether we're constructing models, using computer vision of a 3D space to navigate through it on the Martian surface, or in any generalized environment for collision avoidance on drones, or whether we're creating models of how the economy works and how like millions of different relationships are interconnected, and applying that on a personalized basis to people's individual portfolios. I mean, what's the difference? The domain. These domains start looking more and more similar. Actually, my wife runs a company called Very Sim Life, and they have built a scaled model of the human body for drug development. And so, like, in some ways, who's to say, like, what's more complicated, the human body or our global economy with all of its interconnected pieces? And so, we found that there's certain hedge funds where like this kind of knowledge is really self-contained. Bridgewater comes to mind, where they've truly built, think about the world as a machine, and they've built incredible quantitative economic systems and descriptions of how the world works. And so in some ways, global predictions are commercial version of these Bridgewater type models and understanding of how the world works. And if we can build the same kind of economic machine, and we start off applying that to people's individual investor portfolios, honestly, just because I need something myself and I didn't trust any of the human financial advisors that I talked to. All right, so in some ways, we're just building something for ourselves, that we think is applicable to millions of others as well. And then, long term, we can expand these global predictions, economic models to work with governments and multinationals and insurance companies and, anybody else that benefits from, knowing what's going to happen in the economy 6 months from now, 12 months from now, or at least wants to model that risk or run different simulations, in a scalable way without having to, start from scratch.
So I had Ken on. He's the CEO of Fluid Markets, which is a YC Winter 23 batch. And
I just talked to him, actually. I just met him a week ago.
Oh yeah, he's a cool guy. And him and I were arguing back and forth that an AGI couldn't crack the full stock market. I think it will. well, substantially crack it, and potentially paralyze the full market for, let's call it, a day or 36 hours. Do you think this could happen?
Definitely, yeah. I don't think it's that complex. But I do think there's very different scales on which it can happen. I think that there's something about understanding very quickly what's happening in terms of like high frequency trading and making decisions based on that, and responding very quickly, making a million small little trades in a single day versus like trying to understand macroeconomic activity and how that all ties together. Our bet is that it's a lot easier to crack it at a macro level. And so I don't know. I think it's the wrong. I think there's something much simpler than AGI that we can build to like properly model macroeconomic movements and like run out these different scenarios. Without, I mean, AGI is like needs to understand a lot more, right? Like we can build just a really, really, really incredible, economic, like what we call our economic insights engine, is the infrastructure for this AI system to be able to understand it all, pull it all in, and like shift this understanding in real time. I also think that like one of the biggest challenges with building some AGI that reacts real time to markets is that you need to pull in significant amount of data and basically update this AGI continuously, which like feels fairly inefficient. And so maybe like I think it's better to start on a macro trend and sort of think of like 2 to 12-month forecasts. And then if that works quite well, then you reduce it to like, okay, how do we feed information quicker? How do we feed more relevant information about sort of like these? There's a lot like in the near term, like today in next week, a lot of markets move based on sentiment, right? So how do we feed in news and investor reaction and psychology? And like, I think you move from 2 months to working on 1 month and working on 2 weeks, then working on a single day. Like it's better to work down like that rather than trying to build some like bottoms up AGI that tries to do like this high frequency trading. Because a lot of the high frequency trading is basically just like for, front running. And so like having the payment for order flow information is way, way, way more profitable than having an AGI that predicts on like milliseconds or second basis.
Right. Let's do round 2 for that, because I know you need to go pick up the kids. I'd love to talk about the implications of that. What if you're the company doing that and you gain $1 trillion tomorrow and completely paralyze the stock market, which seems to be win-lose in most instances? What happens after that? Yeah, round 2 in a couple of weeks from now. Where can people find out more about you, Alex?
Yeah, would happily come back on, chat through these things. I love it. You're asking absolutely the right questions. And it's going to come way faster than I think people are really prepared for. Just because there's like limitations in the human mind, I think, of being able to process things at these scales and thinking exponentially like this. Follow me on Twitter, Alex Harm. But most importantly, just sign up for a free trial, portfoliopilot.com. Give me feedback. Tell me what else you'd like to see. And, if you DM me, I'll give you a promo code to get a certain percentage off as well.
Love it, dude. And I am Charles Cormier, host of founderwisdompodcast.com. That was Alexander Harmsen. You can find him on that name on LinkedIn.